Hi everyone. This is a quick demo to showcase the new setting to apply cluster-wide pod security standards in Harvester. This setting will be available in 1.8.0. Uh, Based on continuous feedback we've received, a lot more users are using Harvester in large multi-tenanted setups. Some of these setups are not just being used for virtualized workloads, but also for running bare metal workloads. In such a scenario, cluster admins need to resort to third-party tools to avoid workloads from running with escalated privileges. One K8's native means to avoid this is to leverage pod security standards. Uh, there is a blog post we did a while back to show how a user can apply pod security standards on an existing Harvester cluster. Uh, to set it up, basically we have to pass some additional arguments to the API server, which in the case of Harvester can be done via the cloud init CRD. Once those arguments are passed for the changes to take effect, you need to restart the API server on all the control plane nodes. Uh, so as you can imagine, this is sort of very static and harder to maintain. So for example, if you wanted to whitelist namespaces or add exemptions to namespaces, it becomes sort of harder to manage because you have to go edit the cloud init CRD each time, wait for the files to sync and restart the control plane nodes for the changes to take effect. With that in mind, we have a new setting in Harvester which simplifies all of this and provides a better user experience. Uh, so this the setting is by default disabled. If you have a new install or if you upgrade to 1.8.0, the setting would be disabled. To enable this setting, you need to specify a JSON string as a value to the setting. Uh, the setting includes four key components. So first up is the Boolean flag enabled. As soon as you enable set this to true, uh, the the setting will ensure that a baseline pod security setting is applied to all the namespaces in the Harvester cluster, except for the Harvester managed system namespaces, which would be like Harvester system, Cube system, cattle system, basically the system level components that Harvester needs to run. The baseline policy is certified to run for all VM workloads and all other namespaces, including PCI devices, pass-through, etc. So it should satisfy most common scenarios. Apart from that, users can also whitelist namespaces by specifying the list of names, a common separated list of namespaces in the value to the whitelisted namespaces list setting field. What this does is it instructs the Harvester controller to no longer apply any PSS settings to these namespaces. The idea being that this allows a user to basically experiment and find out what pod security standard would probably work for their workload, and then they can remove the namespace and move the namespace either to a privileged or a restricted, or just let it run in baseline mode. uh, then another field in the setting is the privileged namespaces list. Again, you can specify a comma separated list of namespaces. And what this means is a privileged pod security policy is standard is applied to these namespaces. The privileged policy is purposely open and entirely unrestricted. So please be aware of the implications of this. And last but not least, we also have the restricted namespaces list. Again, you specify a comma separated list of namespaces. And in this case, the restricted name port security standard is applied to these namespaces, which enforces a wide variety of pod hardening best practices. You can read more about it on the official pod security, official Kubernetes documentation about pod security standards. And now we can have a quick demo to see this in action. So in my case, I already have a cluster which is running v1.8.0 RC. I already have the setting enabled. I have set up a namespace named whitelist, which is part of the whitelisted namespaces list. I have a namespace called privileged namespace, which is part of the privileged namespaces list. And I also have a restricted namespace, which is part of the restricted namespaces list. So to see the setting, I have this harvester cluster. Oops. It would help if I actually remembered the name. Okay. So as you can see, I have applied this value already. So I have the baseline policy running. So if I look at so I've written a few sample workloads. So one is a baseline pod, which is running an extra security context with the capability of set UID added. And I have a privileged pod as well, which is running a privileged pod security context. So by default, all namespaces have the baseline PSS available, pod security standard set. So in this particular case, I am going to create the baseline pod in the default namespace. And because this is a valid workload, the pod will get created. Now, if I try and run a privileged workload, then obviously the workload gets rejected. So similarly, I can create the baseline workload in a whitelisted namespace, where obviously there is no pod security standard applied. Whitelist. And I can also create the privileged workload in the whitelist namespace. Right. So as you can see, the PSS allows the privileged pod to go through. If we now try and run the same pod for baseline in a restricted namespace where I've got the restricted pod security standard applied, it blocks even any sort of, capabilities being added to the pod security context, capabilities being added. And since it rejects baseline, it will obviously reject the privileged one as well. Okay, so as expected, this workload is rejected as well. So that was a quick and short demo of the new Harvester setting to manage your cluster-wide pod security standards. Hopefully this was useful. Thank you.